Would you say that being intellections they are without intelligence? Socrates said, "But this possesses no logos. Nevertheless, it seems to me indeed to be clearly seen especially as follows. On the one hand, these ideas are set up to be assimilated to these models and are their likenesses. And the self-participation by the other things is nothing other than to become assimilated to the selves of the ideas themselves." The idea of assimilation. Socrates is now open to the idea that there is such a being, and he calls it a paradigm. And so physical things in our everyday world that is like it, the kind of likeness is through assimilation to the paradigm. Pretty cool, right? A step up from the idea that, there is no such thing as being, it's just a concept, it's just in your soul. It's all just relative to that, right? It's all many. Socrates is leveling up and we're going along with him. Parmenides, therefore, if anything becomes like the idea, can it be possible that the idea not be like that which becomes assimilated? And by as much as the assimilated nature is rendered like self? Or is there any reason why the like cannot be like the like? Parmenides is taking the other side of it, isn't he? Well, if we're becoming like the ideas, does that mean the ideas are becoming like those things that are becoming assimilated? The like. Or is there any reason why the like cannot be like the like? Can the like not be like the like? Says Parmenides. Socrates says, there is not. Parmenides responds, accordingly then, notice question, answer. Accordingly, get rid of this highlight down the bottom. Accordingly then, is there not a great necessity that the relationship of like to like should participate of one idea? Of the self? What does that mean? If like becomes like, are they participating on the single idea? Does he mean the self idea of likeness? Or does he mean the higher, the self? If like things should participate of one paradigm or idea of the self, necessarily, but will not that through participation of which likes are like be the ideal self, the idea self? So if like becoming like is becoming like the idea of likeness, are they both becoming like the idea of self? Because they're becoming a single self? They're becoming like themselves. A single thing, a single self. So does that mean they're becoming like the idea of self? Yes, entirely so. Hence neither can a thing be like the idea, nor can the idea be like the thing. For if this were not the case, another idea will always appear besides that species, and that species will again become like another, and so a new species that would never cease to come to be so long as any species becomes like its participant. This is the infinite progression problem with this idea. If a like thing, let's use beauty as an example, and then we'll go back to likeness. If a beautiful thing is beautiful because it participates in the idea of beauty or beautiness, then wouldn't they become like each other? So wouldn't there be two beautiful things now? The idea of beauty and the expression, a beautiful person. So now you've got a new category because both of these things are beautiful. So you need another category that they're both becoming like. But now you've got the idea of beauty, the paradigm, the model, beautiful things that are becoming assimilated, and the idea of beauty that can cover both. So now you've got three things, but by the way, wouldn't all three of them have beautiness? This thing that we call beauty that applies to both the paradigm and the examples, that would be beautiful, wouldn't it? So now all three things are beautiful. So now you have another idea, and so on and so on. Parmenides is saying this is the problem we had with likeness. Like things, an apple is like an apple. You are like me in that we're philosophers or we're humans. So we're becoming like the pure idea of likeness, the ultimate, the highest reach of likeness itself. So we're becoming like the paradigm. But then we're both like. So they're both becoming like each other. So even this is becoming like us. So even this is participating in likeness. He's saying, hey, if the thing becomes like the idea, isn't the idea becoming like us too in a similar sort of way? Yeah, I guess it would be. In that case, then this is participating in likeness too. How does it do that? How do things participate in likeness? How do things become like each other? Well, it must be participating in the principle, the idea or the paradigm or the principle of likeness too. So not only are we participating in the principle of likeness to become like the idea of likeness, so too is the principle becoming like us. So it's sharing in likeness. We both are. So there has to be something else that we're both sharing in. So that's what Parmenides is helping Socrates to see. If this was how it worked, there would always be another species, another idea appearing over and over again, onwards and onwards and onwards. So long as any species becomes, any idea becomes like its participant. Makes sense, right? Good argument. Socrates saying, well, you speak most truly. Socrates is following along. Smart kid. So if the other things do not have a share of the idea through likeness, then it is necessary to seek after something else through which they have a share. So what else are we looking for that we're sharing in that makes us like things? So it seems. Do you then, O Socrates, do you see then how great a puzzle arises if anyone defines the ideas as being selves according to by themselves? See? Each of us who are limiting off these ideas, the idea of likeness, the idea of beauty, the idea of greatness, if we separate these things out and define them each on their own, do you see what problems arise? This infinite regress problem. Do you see the problem? Do you see the puzzle? Puzzle, right? Problems are puzzles in philosophy. This is a key important thing, because in the shadow of philosophy, relativism, it's all relative to our opinions. There isn't anything like knowing or true understanding. Then problems are just problems, they're issues. Whereas if we can recognize that problems are solvable, understandable, and are there specifically to help our development, problems are no longer problems, problems are puzzles. Socrates, do you see a puzzle here? Socrates says, oh, I do, very much so. Good for you, Socrates. All right. So do you see the problem? If anyone attempts to define the ideas, to separate them off as themselves, as being selves. Remember being? Purely existing. Socrates, I do very much so. Parmenides, now then, know well that thou dost not yet grasp how great the puzzle is of self. Self-puzzle. You don't grasp it yet. As the saying goes, if thou would place each one idea of the real beings as something as always being something that is separate, you don't grasp how great this puzzle is. As the saying goes, if you place each one idea of the real beings, they have a reality. They're of reality as being something separate. If you want to separate them apart. Lots of highlighting. Socrates asks, well, what do you mean? Parmenides responds, Oops. Going through and removing lots of highlighting. Sorry about this, folks. Okay. So, are you following along? Are we together? Because we have been given the puzzle, right? Socrates has led us along through this questioning to see a significant puzzle. Parmenides recognizes it is a puzzle, and he's like, well, you don't actually get how great this puzzle is if you want to separate all of the individual beings. For what reason? To understand them, to know them, to figure out how things are as they are, what kind of world we're living in. Socrates says, what do you mean? Here we go. Parmenides, on the one hand, there are many other puzzles indeed. But on the other hand, the following one is the greatest. This is the greatest puzzle. If anyone should say the idea selves, now, I might use the word ideal to refer to idea. We can see it's capitalized, we can see it's in purple, and we can see the idon underneath that refers to the Greek word ideos. So we know what it means, but it reads better to say the ideal in English. Until, of course, we get used to using the funny word idea. There are many puzzles indeed, but on the other hand, this is the greatest. If anyone should say that the ideal selves cannot even be properly known, being such as we said they must be, it could not even be proven to anyone that he is mistaken. If it were not the case, on the one hand, that he who argues that it could be proven happened to be experienced in a multitude of particulars, and who is, someone who has natural talent. On the other hand, he should be willing to follow the proof through many long and elaborate details. But even then, he who contends that the ideal selves are unknowable, may be unpersuaded. So here he's saying, hey, Socrates, this is a great problem. You started by saying, I can't really understand how we participate in these ideas, these pure selves. And so Parmenides goes, you don't even get it yet. No, there are lots of puzzles as humans. This is the greatest puzzle. What is the greatest puzzle? Wise Parmenides, teacher of Socrates, the father of Western thought. What is the greatest puzzle? Wow, isn't this cool? He's laying it out for us. That if someone should say that the idea selves can't be known, such as we're saying that they must be, separated and known each individually, It could not even be proven that he is mistaken. Even if the one who is arguing that it can be proven happens to be very experienced in a multitude of ways and who has talent in showing these things, and the other person is willing to follow. They're willing to follow a talented, experienced person who can show these things are knowable through many long and elaborate details. Hey, even if you watch all of these videos, even if you go through all of these videos, following along, reading along, following a very talented author, Plato, if you contend that the selves are unknowable, if that's your position, you can't know these things, even if you're willing to follow. Even if you're willing to follow someone who's very talented and experienced at showing through many long and elaborate proofs, that person may still remain unpersuaded. That is the biggest problem. Wow. Really highlights the significance of Parmenides walking Socrates through his issue. Hey, by the way, how do you understand these ideas? Just as unknowable concepts, just within individual souls, not having their own being? Well, actually, he starts that way, doesn't he? And that was his confusion. So, Socrates says, Zeno, you say that there is such a thing as one and many, but they are one. How can they be one? How can these ideas themselves be like and unlike, or one and many? That doesn't make sense. I mean, physically, I can get it because I'm one person and you're one person, so we both have one. We participate in the idea of one. And many, I have many parts. I got a left hand and a right hand. That makes sense. That's not wonderful. That's obvious, right? In that way. But someone who can do that for the ideas themselves, the things which you claim can be known as pure beings, how can likeness be the same as unlikeness, but also separated apart? How can they be different but the same? Show me that. Parmenides comes in and introduces himself into the conversation. Says, look, you worry too much about the opinions of human beings, and you need to go through this reasoning to say, look, you think of ideas as just concepts. And he asks them a question, how do we participate? Is it like a pie, a physical pie? You have a part of the pie or the whole? There's no other way of eating the pie other than a part or the whole? And he reasoned to show that you can't do either. If you take a part of the idea, of the pure idea, then it's less than itself. How can you take a part? It wouldn't be one. It's lost a part. And if there are many different, you can't have the whole of it, because if there are many different things that I like, if there are many beautiful things, then this can't be the whole of it because it's separated into many different parts. So you can't have the whole of it. You can't have part of it, like a sail. If beauty covers all of us, you have a part of it. So you can't have a whole, you can't have a part. You don't understand how we can participate in them. If you say we're becoming like a paradigm, like an ideal model, then wouldn't it becoming like us? Which means that we have another, and another, and another, and another. And he says, look, this is the difficulty that arises, but actually, what we're talking about is an even greater difficulty. The greatest difficulty, the greatest puzzle. That is, if you're convinced that these things are unknowable and they're just concepts, all you can experience as a human being is your physical senses of examples, and you don't understand what these things are, you don't understand how we can come to know them, and you can't experience them for yourself. You don't even think that they can be experienced. All we can know are our examples in our individual souls. It's all relative. And this is the greatest puzzle, because Even if you come across a great philosopher like myself, who is experienced and has talent and can walk you through the proofs, and even if you're willing to go along and follow these proofs, if you think these ideas can't be known, you are going to remain unpersuaded. You'll be stuck. Wow, what a thing to say, Parmenides. Socrates responds, "In what way then, O Parmenides?" "In a way that I think both you and any other person, Socrates, who would set up the ousia," remember what ousia means? The being, the knowable being, pure mind that can be experienced with the mind, turning about. "In a way that I think both you and any other person who would set up the ousia of each idea as subsisting, self by itself, you set up that they can exist by themselves, you must agree in the first place that none of the idea selves subsist in us." If they have their own existence, they're not in us as a concept. They have their own being. Socrates. "For if they did only subsist in us, how could their ousia subsist self by self? How could they be themselves by themselves? How could they have their own existence?" You speak well. You're following. Good on you, Socrates. You speak well. "Is it not the case that of the ideas that exist in relation to each other, however many they are, they each maintain their self-ousia. They exist, and they're in relation to each other in this realm of pure being. However many they are, they each have their own self-existence, their own self-ousia in relation to each other, to the selves." Following? "These ideas, beauty and justice and goodness and likeness, all have a kind of existence in relation to each other in this realm of ideas, that we have to be open to thinking that they're knowable, so they can't be in the souls. However many they are, they have their own self-ousia. They have their own kind of individual existence in relation to themselves, but not in relation to those existing among us, whether in relation to certain likenesses or in whatever way one may set selves up. And we do participate in each and every self to which we apply some particular name, but on the other hand, those beings that exist among us bear the same name as those. But again, selves also exist in relation to ourselves, but not in relation to those ideas. And again, selves exist in relation to themselves, but not in relation to those whom they thus share their name." What the hell? Excuse me. What the hell is he talking about? He seems to be saying 4 different things, at least. Let's unpack this. Isn't it interesting that such a wise person can say so much in such a condensed period of time? I mean, there's a joke in philosophy. These guys aren't getting paid by the word. Plato doesn't waste time with unnecessary words, but this guy, wow, he sees something and he's able to lay it out so succinctly that we have to do the work, which is good. Notice that in philosophy, we're not reading a book quickly like we would read like a Harry Potter book. Or I was going to say 50 Shades of Grey, but you people might want to read that book, might read that book a little slower for another reason. But we are reading this book very carefully. Each word is important. Have you noticed that each thing hinges on a key word? We have to really understand what he means by those beings. Or when he says self-ousia, what does he mean? What does ousia mean, first of all? That requires some work, some thinking, some understanding. When he says self-ousia, we have to think, what does that mean? So each key word here. And if we look at the Greek underneath, there are even less words in the Greek than there are in English. Their language, their way of thinking and seeing must have been so precise and pure that they can see and communicate in such a way. But for us, as budding philosophical adventurers, we have to do the work to bring our minds to match it. It requires some effort, some time, some reflection, some reviewing, some conversations like this, to unpack and see what's there. Now, the cool thing about that is it might take some work the first time, but then when we go back and read it again, we can see it a bit more quicker, right? You've ever played a game where you go through a certain first area or whatever? You ever played Dark Souls? I mean, when I played Dark Souls the first time, it took me ages just to get past the first 5 mobs. Like weeks. I moved in inches. But now that I went through it a couple of times and I did the work, I can breeze through that. I've understood it. I can see the mechanics. I can see what's at play. I can see the key ideas of the game. That's what the developers are trying to say. That's what they're trying to do. That's how this works. Now I can fly through it a bit quicker. We're doing the same thing. This is our first reading. We need to really unpack it, see what he's saying, pull out the key ideas, see how they relate to each other. And then, do the work to grasp it the first time. But do you notice something interesting? What's our job? He is giving us words, ideas, logos. They're of the highest, of course, the self, the pure ideas, and how we as souls participate. You couldn't talk about anything more meaningful. So we get given these logos. And what's our job? To break it down. What are we doing? Separating apart the key words, the key ideas, understanding themselves in themselves. What does ousia mean itself? What does he mean by self? What does he mean by being? What does he mean by idea? We're separating these key words, these key ideas by themselves, and we're also seeing how they connect and how they're being used together. How do they relate to each other in the sentences? Each sentence. The ousia, we've got to separate that word out. Of each idea, separate that out. Subsisting, what does that mean? What kind of subsisting? Pure existence? Self by self. Or, what does self mean? What does that expression mean? Just in that one passage, that one sentence we just read, we have to separate each idea that have a way of existing together in a sentence that can be seen in the sentence, but first you've got to separate them out and know them individually, separately. And then what do? Then we have to see how they relate to each other in the sentence. How does the sentence mean? If you would set up the ousia of each idea as subsisting self by self, what does that mean? Well, we've separated ousia is their own pure mind existence. Idea, the pure form of the thing in the metaphysical realm prior to the physical. Subsisting, what do we mean by subsisting? Eternally having that eternal timeless existence. Self by self, what does that mean? It's their own individual self-existence, and they can be seen on their own. Okay, we've unpacked it all, now put it together. If you would set up the existence of each of these beings as subsisting self by self, now we can put it together and see it as a sentence. Separating the ideas, seeing how they relate to each other, seeing how they function as a whole, and seeing, well, hang on a second, each time we read that sort of thing, we could ask, well, how does it affect us? Why are we reading about the essence of these pure beings that can have a pure eternal existence on their own eternally? How does it relate to me as a soul, and you as a soul, and humanity as a collective of souls? See what we're doing? Separating the ideas, seeing what they are themselves by seeing their own essence, their own ousia, their own self by selfness, seeing how they relate together, each other, and seeing then how that then relates to us. Why do we care? Well, because we're interested in experience. We have ousia, so we can maybe, if these ideas have an individual existence, self by self, and they are pure ideas, being, and they have a subsistence, they're eternal, and they have ousia, and we have ousia, then we can maybe ourselves experience that which is eternal, timeless, separately existing, and the pure paradigms of everything else. If we also have ousia, that's how it affects us as souls. Do you see what's happening? The very thing they're talking about as the spiritual exercise, as the philosophical or logos exercise, that they're talking about going through in their lives as human beings, as great human beings. These are great men that are doing the greatest thing, that have left the greatest works for our culture. Over 2,000 years later, we are still reading it. It has still the most important, prescient meaning to us. They relate to us right now, and will probably relate always, eternally. Aliens could discover this ancient text. That's why we're in space right now. Ooh, because even aliens could come across this ancient text, and it would be significant and meaningful and really important for them to read. That's how great these men are. And what they're doing. And they're saying, hey, by the way, Socrates, this is our whole life. You are 19, my student's 40, I'm 60. You're young. You need to do work. Spend your life doing this activity. Here are the difficulties. Here's what's going to be overcome. By the way, the biggest problem, the biggest puzzle will be if you don't think that you can know these things. But let's keep going. So these greatest men are doing something in their lives, their whole lives. Only this. We talked about a character who gets distracted and gets into playing with horses for a while. But if Parmenides or Socrates are the sorts of people not to get distracted, then their whole lives would be doing this. So think about that. The very thing that they're explaining is the most important thing to do, and the greatest men in the galaxy spend their whole lives doing. What? Separating the key terms, the self terms, individually, seeing them self by self, putting them together, seeing how they relate to us. We are doing that too. We're doing it right now. In this text. It's our vehicle. Right now we are doing in 1-2 hour period what they are doing in their whole lives. We are becoming, and therefore, using the logos, we would be becoming somehow assimilated to or like them. We would be becoming great and wise. So what do they say to do? Oh, get the ideas, separate themselves self by self. It's the greatest thing to do. It's the most difficult thing to do. Even worse if you don't think it's doable. But separate, and you have to see them individually. It's really important to do that, and then see how they come together. Together, they have, what does it say? They exist in relation to each other. You speak well, but these ideas have an existence, not only self by self, but in relation to each other. See how they fit together now, and how they maintain their self-existence in relation to each other, to selves. We're doing that with these words in these sentences. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful? Shouldn't that be a confirmation that what we're doing is important and on the right path? That's what the logos can do. It has that turning about nature, but it also can turn about to us and say, hey, thumbs up. Where's my little thumbs up thing? There we go. Thumbs up. You're on the right track. This is one of those one such confirmation of such a thing. So, in that spirit, let's do the work. Right? Let's pull apart this sentence, break it down to its individual self-by-self ideas, see how they fit together, and then see how it affects us. Let's do it. Okay. Is it not the case that each of these ideas have an existence in relation to each other? So they have an existence in that realm of being, and they somehow exist together in some way. They relate to each other, like a sentence. However many they are, so we haven't determined whether hair and mud and dirt are in there yet, but however many, they will have their existence in relation to each other. They maintain their self-ousia, so they keep that ousia-ness, even when relating to each other, to selves, but not in relation to those existing among us. Their nature, their self-ousia that's maintained, has nothing to do with whether or not we're participating in it, right? If suddenly you become less beautiful, the idea of beautiful itself doesn't become less beautiful. It still keeps its beautiness, even if if you become less beautiful somehow. If you get a really bad haircut or something, and then you say, oh no, I got a really terrible haircut today, and that means beauty itself will be less beautiful. I have made reality less beautiful by my ugliness. Oh, shame. Or justice. I ate all of the cookies and I didn't leave any for my brother. That was so unfair of me. That was so unjust. I have made the eternal idea of justice less just by my actions in the world. No, he's saying it doesn't have its existence. It doesn't maintain its ousia in relation to us. To those examples existing among us. Whether in relation to likeness or in whatever way you might set cells up. So we set up beauty. Imagine what it would be like if beauty, the ousia of beauty, became less beautiful if we get a bad haircut, or if the idea of justice becomes less just if we ate all the cookies in an unfair way. Whatever you set up. And we do participate of each and every self to which we apply the particular name. So he's saying, but we do participate in each of those that we apply the name. So we call something beautiful. Oh, we do participate in the self of beauty, to which the thing that we call beautiful. Oh, that being just, we do participate. If we call it justice, that thing that we call justice does participate in that idea of justice. But on the other hand, there's a different way of thinking about it. Those beings that exist among us bear the same name as those. And again, selves also exist in relation to ourselves, but not in relation to those ideas. So this would be, I guess the only way of reading the self here is as the particular. Let's look at our notes again, remind us. We have the three ways of reading self, remember? It, the honorific, the being selves, and the ultimate self. So here it could be the it, and that's how I'm reading it. The ones among us that bear the name that exist in relation to these individual selves. I'm beautiful in relation to ugly Pete who lives up the street. But stunning Jenny is even more beautiful than me. So they have their own existence. Are not in relation to those ideas. Seems like saying the opposite. There's one way of thinking about the selves that do participate. So us as souls in the everyday world, somehow those things do participate in those pure selves. But in another way, they don't. They only have their individual existence in our everyday world and don't have a relationship to those ideas, so they're disconnected. And again, these selves exist in a relation to themselves, but not in relation to those to whom they only share their name. So even more disconnected. So he's given 3 different ways that of understanding here. There are, number 1, the pure beings that have their ousia in relation to themselves and are not affected by us, number 1. Number 2, the ideas that have their own existence, but we do share in them by the names that, like beautiful things, the names that we give particular things. There is that sharing. And number 3, the things that we call beautiful things only have a relationship to each other. I'm only beautiful relative to ugly Pete. I'm only ugly relative to stunning Jenny. Nothing to do with the higher ideas. And there's a third, even, so we've got the 3 here. They have their self-ousia in relation to themselves, nothing to do with us. Not in relation to those existing among us. That's the first one. We should probably write it. Oh, okay. We'll look at the text and then we'll take the notes after. Then we do participate in each of the selves, number 2. And then we have a certain existing relationship relative to only us. And then number 4, we don't even have an existence relative to us. So what I say beautiful is different than what you say beautiful. There isn't even a common idea of beauty among us in the physical world. Do you see the 4? The pure things of themselves, the thing themselves that do relate to us, then the things that are in our world that relate to each other, and then finally a complete disconnection, even in our world relating to each other. We can't even agree on such an idea as beauty. 4 different ways of thinking. So write that down. This is key. Because Socrates is stuck. He's like, well, okay, I don't know how we participate in the ideas. It's not whole and part, but it's not participation in a paradigm because that has that infinite regress. It can't be just a concept because the concept has to be of something. This is where he was, right? We see beautiful things. Oh, great, this is great things. This is Messi, this is LeBron, and this is a great mountain. So we have a concept of greatness, but it has to be of the pure idea of greatness. But then they each have their own oneness. So all of these different pure ideas have their self. Now you could say that they're each one. That means they all somehow must participate in this idea of one. But you could also say that they are themselves, so they all have to participate in the self. So we're left with the question, what does that mean? What is the one or what is the self? That's where we were before, and now we're at a stage where we have, look, Parmenides is saying, listen to me, Socrates. Look. 1. What? One. The beings have their existence themselves. Oops. Number 2. Oh, and by the way, we can say ontos, ousia, altos. 3 key Greek words. Altos means self, ousia is existence, ontos is being. Number 2. Beings do. Let's write that like that. Do relate to our cells. Notice little s and capital S here. Number 3. There's another way of looking at it. Whoops, that's too many. Where our in instances, examples, our named examples relate examples relate to each other. Right? I'm beautiful, and I can say that I'm more beautiful than Ugly Pete. And Ugly Pete can say, well, I'm less beautiful than Stunning Jenny, without even thinking about beauty itself. And then 4, individual examples among ourselves don't relate to exist in relation to themselves, but not in relation to those who have the same. Okay, so they're don't relate to others that share the same name. So that's where we're at right now. 4 different ways of addressing this puzzle that Parmenides has given Socrates. Socrates is like, well, actually, yeah, how do the beings relate to us? I can't, well, yeah, I mean, they have to exist. It's the worst problem for a human if you don't think that they exist, because even if Parmenides explains it, you're not going to be convinced. So, okay, I'm not going to go down. That's where I would completely lose myself. I don't want to go down that road. Okay, so, oh, I got something in the chat. First time chat. Welcome to the channel, dude. Yeah, so, okay, they have some existence, but how? How do we relate to the ideas? How does beauty or likeness or justice or greatness, how? And isn't it interesting that Parmenides doesn't just give him the answer? He said, look, here are 4 possible ways. Now that he's got him stuck, he's got him at a puzzle, and by the way, you don't even get how great the puzzle is that you're in. I mean, we probably do because it's Parmenides and Socrates, the greatest humans of history here. So, yeah, if they're talking about it, it's probably going to be a great puzzle. If they're calling it a great puzzle, it's probably going to be epic. The most epic, right? So, we're a bit more clued in. But he doesn't just give him the answer. What? What is he being? Is he being a jerk? Is he being cruel? Socrates is stuck. He's puzzled. I don't know how we relate to the pure ideas, to the beings. But I want to know because I'm a smart guy. I want to know what beauty is. I want to know why we're here. I want to know where we come from. I want to know what mind is, what self is. I'm a self. I have mind. I'm interested in beauty and justice. What the heck are they? What is Parmenides doing? Is he being a jerk? Not just telling him? Giving him 4 different answers? Those beings have their existence themselves. Another way of thinking, oh yeah, but they do have an existence in relation to us. Another way is, oh no, we just have our own, those things that have the name of beauty and justice and mind and souls. It's just in relation to each other. There's a 4th one, oh, it's not even that. We're completely disconnected. What do you make of that? Is that weird? Is he being a jerk? Why is he saying it that way? Just pick out which one's right. Can they all be right? They can't be right because 4 contradicts 3. 2 seems to be different or a little bit contradictory of 1. Isn't that weird? Let's keep going a little bit. Let's keep going a little bit further and see where this takes us. This part here is a clue by the translator, but we're going to leave that because it's not in the text, and we might come back to that a bit later. So let's reread this. So again, now that we've separated the individual words out, like on my pen here, like ontos and ousia and autos, beings, existent selves, key ideas, we need to have those with us. We separate the ideas. Separate these ideas out by themselves. Now we're seeing how the words, now that we've done that, we can reread the sentence and see how they relate to each other. And then after we can reread, so we separate them themselves. We can see how they exist in relation to each other in a single sentence, like number 2. Then we can reread the whole paragraph and see how the whole things relate, all of the different sentences relate to each other. And then we can ask after we read it, does that apply to us? Does it apply to us? And does it apply to everybody? Are we discovering a universal truth here that we can take with us in our lives, in our reincarnations? If we reincarnate onto an alien planet a million years in the future, can we take this with us? Or are they completely disconnected? These key ideas that we are discovering don't relate to other examples, wherever we may find them. So now what are we doing? Now that we've separated them off We're going to reread the paragraph and see how they relate to each other. We're doing the work. We're playing the game. You speak well. This is the same paragraph now that we've broken it down. You speak well. Is it not also the case that of the ideas that exist in relation to each other, however many they are, they maintain their self-ousia in relation to themselves, but not in relation to those existing among us, whether it be likeness or in whatever way we want to set up the selves. And we do participate of each and every self to which we have apply a particular name. But, on the other hand, those beings that exist among us bear the same name as those, and again, selves also exist in relation to ourselves, our particular ones, but not in relation to those ideas. And again, fourth, those selves exist in relation to themselves, but not in relation to those to whom they thus only share their name. Do we see it? They maintain their own ousia in relation to themselves, but not relating to us, either likeness or whatever else we set up. We do participate in each self, which we have a particular example or a particular name. Again, those selves that also exist are not in relation to those ideas. And finally, we're not even in relation to those who we share a name. The four ideas. So we've got to make a fix here. We said beings relate to selves only. That means not in relation to ourselves. Then number 2 is they do. Number 3 is our named examples relate only to each other, not to beings. Oh, I should be showing you this text. Sorry about that. So only, as in not to us. Number 2. Let's write that a bit cleaner. Not to us. Number 2, they do relate to ourselves. Number 3, the named examples relate only to each other. Us. Relate only to each other, not to beings. And finally, our individual examples among ourselves don't relate to others that share the same name. So there's 4 levels of kinds of relationship. Only themselves, not to us. Also to us. Only among us and not to the higher. And then not even that. So, where does he go from there? Why has he done it that way? Parmenides. Socrates says, how do you mean this? Thank goodness he answered in that way. What the hell are you talking about, crazy old man? That's 4 things. I'm stuck. I'm puzzled. You kind of made me puzzled. I kind of came here to do that. Thank you for that. But I'm stuck. How do we relate to the ideas? And you've given me 4 answers. How do you mean this? Thank you, Socrates, for our sake, asking that question so he can explain what the hell he's doing. Parmenides. Such as, if one of us were the Lord or the servant of anyone, then the one who is the servant is certainly not in any way the servant of the selfhood of the lordship of the Lord, nor is the one who is Lord the Lord of the selfhood of the servant. Whereas by being human, they share in both these human relations. On the other hand, self-mastership is that which it is. Self-mastership is that which it is from its relation to self-stewardship. And self-stewardship in the same way is stewardship in relation to lordship. Thus, the relations in us exercise none of their power in relation to those ideas, nor those in relation to us. Thus, I say, they both subsist by themselves, and also selves in relation to themselves, but in a similar way, those in us in relation to themselves. Or do you not understand what I say? Well, I don't. Let's unpack it. The Lord of any servant of anyone, and the servant to the Lord. We're not dealing with selfhood. The servant isn't serving the selfness, the higher aspect, the selfhood of the Lord in our everyday world. Think about it. What do slaves or workers in our capitalist world, what do we serve of our boss or the Lord? We make them money or something like that. We give them fame or wealth or increase their portfolio, increase their yearly dividends. That's what we do for them. We're not interested in the selfness of them. We're not interested in making their self better. We're not serving their true benefit of their selfhood. But we're still called Lord and servant. So we have a name from something. So we're not the servant of the selfhood of the Lord, nor is the one who is Lord the Lord of the selfhood of the servant. Hey, they're not really helping us. We know this. When we're slaves to a king or worker bees to a conglomerate, they're not actually cared about making us better, are they? They're not really the Lord over our selfhood. But by being human, we still share in those human relations. We still have those dynamics in our everyday world, even though it's nothing to do with the selfhood. Which, if you were a higher being in the realm of ideas, that's what you would be doing. You wouldn't think beauty itself would be interested in making money for Bezos or whatever. No. They're functioning through the logos, and they have their own existence to benefit the self, their higher existence, their selfness, and maybe even if they all have their own selfness, maybe there's an even greater term, self itself. That was our puzzle from last week. If all of the ideas have their own pure self-existence, that's what they would be trying to nurture and serve, their selfness. And also, maybe if they're all one, then maybe there's a higher thing called one or a higher thing called self. Maybe, we don't know yet. On the other hand, self-mastership. What does self do? Takes it to the honorific, raising it up a level. That, there's a special word. I should write it down because it's awesome. It's a fun word, and if you're in this game, you're going to use it a lot. It's such a handy word. So I'm going to write it down so I can share it with you here. Gogic. That means elevated to the higher level. So, by introducing the word self, the honorific, we're elevating the analogy from Lord to servant to the ideal, the being's self-mastership and self-stewardship. Now, even the words, we've gone from Lord and slave to Lord and servant to master and steward. That even sounds better. So that activity of taking an example or taking an analogy and raising it to its highest level, that's the word anagogic. Just so you know, it's going to be added to your bag, added to your skill set. Like, that's a weapon. That's like a shoulder pad. You're always going to be wearing this shoulder pad, like as an adventurer, because this is a good one. Anagogic. Let's go back. So we both being human, we share in these relations, but on the other hand, self-mastership is that which it is from its relation to self-stewardship. So these two are related to each other, and self-stewardship in the same way is stewardship in relation to lordship. So in the realm of ideas, they have their existence and their relationship in relation to each other. What does that sound like? Whoop. That sounds like they have their existence in relation to selves. Self-lordship is related to self-stewardship. And he's saying also that when we talk about Lord and servant, they relate among ourselves. Those two words, Lord and servant, relate to each other, but they don't relate to the Lord. The master, steward. So, on one level, he said, by the way, self-mastership and self-stewardship only relate to each other. Another way of looking at things is we still have that being human, but we call it Lord and slave, Lord and servant. That's this one here. There's two examples. But he's saying there is some kind of relationship between the ideal Lord and master and steward for us to have Lord and servant. There must be some kind of way. So that's number two. Whoops. That's number two. They do have a kind of relationship. For us to even have that, where would we get it from? So that's the second one. But then, does the relationship in us exercise none of their power in relation to those ideas, nor in relation to us? Thus I say they both subsist by themselves and also in relation to selves, and in a similar way those in us in relation to themselves. What does that mean? Those ideas, the power in relation to those ideas or those in relation to us. Thus the relationship in us exercises none of their powers. That's the third one. So now he concludes. Thus I say that they both have their own one, that's number two, in relation to themselves, and they both subsist in themselves in relation to themselves, that's number one, right? Remember? And in a similar way, those in relation those in us in relation to them. That's number 2. They do relate. But he's also mentioned here, there is no connection. So he's covered 1, 2, and 3. He's left out 4. Do you understand? Socrates says, I understand quite well. I'm with you, buddy. Let's see how far we can go. And we've got given by our translator a way of outlining that with an analogy. Mastership and stewardship in our everyday world, Lord and servant, is to the higher analogy of self-mastership and self-stewardship. This is a 4-term analogy. 2 terms on here, expressing a relationship, is like, so similar, so there's some samenesses and some differences. To the higher, these 2 terms on the right. So left is to the right. Lord and servant is like self-mastership and self-stewardship. Parmenides, on the other hand, on the one hand, is it not also the case that if self-knowledge is the knowledge of that which is true, whoa, you're interested in truth. He's saying, self-knowledge is the knowledge of that which is true. Interesting. He's telling us something about what self-knowledge is. Then knowledge would be of that self. What self? The true self. If knowledge is that of which that is true, it's not interested in examples of true examples. Like, it's true that my car is in my garage. You think that's self-knowledge? Or the knowledge? Goodness. I've highlighted everything. Last time I read, I must have seen a lot. Because I highlighted so much. Sorry about this. Okay, let's go back. Must it be knowledge of the self of true? Perfectly so. But on the other hand, will every knowledge, which is then in turn be the knowledge of each one of the real beings that exist? Wow! He's in the middle of this puzzle, middle of this confusing dialogue, and he's dropping some knowledge bombs on our asses. Look, every knowledge is the knowledge of each one of the real beings that exist. Thankfully, we've already done some work, and we know what beings are. This word here. Onton. Onton. Like a wonton. Or a tauntaun in Star Wars. Ontos. Onton is beings. Like ontos. Onton. That exist. We know what existence means. Eternally, outside of the physical world. Eternally and deathlessly or immortally. So each knowledge must be of the real beings that exist. Wow. Now we know what... Well, now we're getting some big clues. Sherlock Holmes, get out your notebook, write this down, of what exactly knowledge is. Don't we want to know what knowledge is? Don't we want to know? Don't we want to be knowers? He's dropping some knowledge bombs in the middle of this. Wow. Lucky us. Every knowledge which is must in turn be the knowledge of each one of these real beings that exist, or not. Yes, it will. Well, Socrates is on the ball. Yeah, I know that already. You don't have to tell me that. I'm 19. I got that figured out already. Wow. Parmenides. But will not the knowledge among us be the truth that exists among us? And in turn, would not each knowledge among us be the knowledge of each of those beings, onton again, so the beings, that happen to exist among us? So we got a question here. He's saying oh god, so many highlighting. Okay, let's just ignore that. So what does he say by among us? Is he saying that each knowledge among us is different? Is he talking about the third thing? Or is he saying that there are some knowledges that must be about the real beings that do exist, but also they have a kind of existence among us, so it's number two. They do relate to us, necessarily. But certainly, the ideal or the idea selves, as you indeed agree, we neither possess nor can they exist such as among us. Now it's three. He's gone from one. Hey, don't they have each knowledge is about the beings that exist? Yeah, that's number one. Number two, but we can have knowledge among us, right? We can know things. We can be wise. Can we have knowledge? So there is a kind of existence of knowable things among us. Yeah. But then he says, that's number two. Number three, but certainly the ideal selves, we can't have, nor can they exist among us. We're not going to go down the street and run into beauty itself. Hey, how you doing, Jack? Oh, I'm good. I'm just on the way to have coffee with truth itself. We can't do that. We can't have it because we have a part or a whole, so we can't take a piece of it. We talked about that already, so it's three. Certainly not, said Socrates. But every class of self is somehow known to be that which it is by means of the idea of knowledge of the self. So every kind of knowledge, we know it's something, it's recognized to be knowledge because it's the idea of knowledge, which is of the self. That's another higher level. So whatever these knowable beings are is somehow of the self. That's our question, right? Are we saying that these are somehow ideas of self? So we've got self at the top, we've got the ideas, and then we've got us as souls in the physical world. Somehow, are they knowledges of the selves of the beings, or is it the idea of self? Whatever the self is can be experienced as an idea, and is that what we understand knowledge to be? Socrates says yes. Keep both, right? Because self has the honorific, which points to the self ideas. We talked about beauty has itself, justice has itself, so we could be referring to that. Or by saying it's an idea of the self, we could say that there is something. If they each have self, there must be something higher called the self. And these could all be experiences or knowledge of that which is beyond even knowable things. You can have knowledge of it. That's the beings. That's what knowledge is. But what's it knowledge of? Its cause, the self. Which one of the two is it? We don't know. Keep both. Take them both with you. Which ideal being we do not possess. So each class of knowledge is recognized to be knowledge because it's the idea of knowledge of the self, which we don't have. We don't possess that here. We do not. Accordingly then, not a single one of the ideas are recognized or known by us, seeing that we do not participate of self-knowledge. Now it's the third. Well, hang on a second. We talked about them having their own existence. We talked about them, us having knowledge of them. That's number two. Now we're saying, well, hang on a second. If it's knowledge is knowledge of the self and we can't have that, put that in our pocket, then we do not participate of self-knowledge. And he's saying that doesn't seem likely that we can do that. Therefore, the beautiful self, which is also the good self, whoa, big knowledge bomb there, and all the selves, so something, the knowledge self, which is also the good self, that's a good bit of information there. And all the selves, which we have surely taken up as being ideas, are unknown by us. I'm afraid they are. Behold, then, an even more fearful consequence. What is it? You will say perhaps that if indeed there is a certain class of knowledge, then self is much more perfect than the knowledge that exists among us. And the same goes for beauty and the other kinds. If there is a pure idea of knowledge that's much more perfect than what we experience in beauty, examples of beauty, right? Yeah. Is it not the case then that if indeed anyone else partakes in self-knowledge, that you will not affirm that anyone possesses the most perfect knowledge more than God does? Necessarily not. Take notice then, is it possible in turn that God can know of our affairs by possessing self-knowledge? Hey, you know who does know these things? If there is such a thing as this pure knowing, then we can't have it as mere souls. But God probably does, right? And it would be more perfect, right? No one has it better than God, right? Of course not. So can God know of our affairs by having self-knowledge? So God has self-knowledge. Does he know about our lives? Socrates said, well, why not? Since it has been agreed to us, O Socrates, that neither do those ideas have the power which they possess in relation to those among us, so they're not connected, nor do those among us in relation to those up there, but that selves exist in relation to selves in each separate realm. Key word here, realm. Now we're talking about levels, realms of reality. We've already been talking about that, the realm of the pure ideas, the realm of the physical world, and then maybe a one above called the self. But he's laying it out here. Yeah, we're so agreed. Is it not so then that it is the most perfect mastership among divinity and the most perfect self-knowledge? Then neither will the mastership of those gods rule over us at any time, nor will their knowledge know of us, nor of any other of our concerns. And in a similar way, we cannot rule over them by our rule, nor can we recognize that which is the divine in any way through the assistance of our knowledge. Hey, if they're different, if we can't have the pure self-knowledge, only God can, then their pure self-knowledge and their kind of mastership and rule is different from us, in a different realm, so they can't affect each other. They can't rule us, or they can't know us. We can't rule them, or we can't know them. Completely different. And again, according to the same logos, now, you might see here same self. In the Greek, the word same, we've already got three kinds of words of ways of reading self, the particular, the honorific, and the ultimate. Now we have a different one, which is same. Sometimes in certain contexts, the word alton can mean same. Using the self logos for them is same. So there's an interesting connection between the concept of, or the idea of same and the idea of self. That's a puzzle, take it with you. But according to the self logos, according to the same logos, according to it, the logos we're talking about, they will neither be our rulers nor have any cognition of our human affairs by having their self-knowledge. And Socrates is like, well, hang on a second. Then wouldn't the logos be wondrous in the extreme, insofar as one would want to deprive divinity of knowing things? What are you talking about? Hang on a second, that's crazy. Okay, I'm with you to the point where self-mastership and self-stewardship is different from lords and servant, okay? Me and Bezos has probably nothing to do with God and the pure ideas. I get that. And if it's different, then, before we talked about the second stage, the second idea that there could be a relationship, but see how he's leading them from one idea to another. Like, what about this? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Well, here's a different way of thinking about it. What about this? Oh, yeah, that makes sense too. Well, here's a third way of thinking about it. That our named examples that we have are only to each other and not to beings. Wouldn't that make sense? Yeah, it does. Well, hang on a second. So you're saying that God's knowledge, the divine knowledge, and the divine mastership can't affect us because they can't know about us. Because we've just said that there's no connection. No connection. Wouldn't that follow from this third position that you hold? Wouldn't that be the consequence of that way of thinking, of this logos, of this realm of logos? We're talking about realms of reality, but we're also seeing here realms of thinking, realms of understanding, kinds of levels or hypotheses of logos. Specific examples. You could have someone who thinks in this way. You could have someone who thinks in this way. You can have someone who thinks in this way. And Parmenides is so skilled at these sorts of arguments. He's walking Socrates through all of them. And he's making good arguments, and they're convincing, and they make sense. They make sense on their levels that they're on. For each of the levels, they make sense of the level they're on, just like what we're talking about. The knowledge makes sense for the knowledge that level is on. It makes sense. Mastership and stewardship makes sense for that level that it's on. Lord and servant makes sense in our our less than human world, our distorted human world. It makes sense in that level. So too, it makes sense for someone at the level or hypothesis of logos that this would make sense and certain things would follow. Also, it would make sense for someone at this to say, oh yeah, there must be some relationship. Yeah, because how would we get Lord and servant if it wasn't based on something? What is it? A concept based on nothing? Of course there is some relationship. And in fact, Socrates said earlier, yeah, we're kind of trying to become more like it. It's like we're assimilating ourselves as we develop and grow to the ideal paradigm. Makes sense. But there's another way of thinking about it. Well, hang on a second. Didn't we say they're unconnected? If it's self-knowledge of the pure self-ideas, then we can't have that in our pocket as a physical. We can't physically put it in our pocket. So we can't have it. We can't have it as a whole. You can't eat the pie as a part or a whole, so we can't have it. So they're disconnected. Doesn't that make sense? Yeah, that does make sense. Different hypothesis, different level or realm of thinking. And it's very convincing. It has its own logic. It has its own merits. It does make sense in a way. Yeah, and what follows? Well, if you're thinking this way, Socrates, that they are only in relation to each other and they're not connected, this follows. The gods can't rule us. They can't know us. And Socrates is saying, well, hang on a second. That sounds a bit mental. Are you saying that the gods are you depriving the gods of knowledge? You can't do that. They know gods if there is such a thing as the gods or God, then it would know everything. That's kind of how we define it. And that's what Socrates said. That's where we're going to finish. Socrates is like, well, I'm followed all the way along. It does make sense. I'm with you on this third hypothesis, this third way of thinking about things, this third realm. But I'm also a bit stuck because that doesn't make sense. Wait, hang on. Yeah, it does follow logically, but it seems absurd for us to say the gods are lacking and the gods' knowledge is lacking and the gods don't rule us. That's kind of what makes them gods. And that's where we'll leave it, on that cliffhanger. I hope you're also puzzled. I hope you followed along. I hope you got something to get stuck about. I hope you got some questions about what Parmenides is doing, why he's laying out these four, how they can all make sense in certain ways. Socrates is following along. Certain implications or consequences follow from having these positions. What that might lead for what that might mean for someone in their life, someone who thinks in the third style, what kind of a life they would lead, what kind of a life someone in the second would lead. Anyway, for us, we're just following the logos. We're going on an adventure. Thankfully, we have Gandalf leading the way as Parmenides, and he's led us into quite an interesting conundrum. We have opened up the path onto a pack of wild goblins. No, boars or something, or some sort of wild monster. Imagine it for yourself. We're at a crossword. Hang on. We've concluded that God's going to be lacking in knowledge. How can we do that? That's our puzzle. That's the challenge we're going to take on next time. That's the enemy we're going to try and overcome. That's the next step on our noblest quest and game of awakening philosophy. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're following along. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I'll see you next time.